First of all, thank you for doing this. How are you feeling? In the last few days, you released the test results from your COVID test and they were positive. How are you feeling?
Well, it feels like I have a cold, quite frankly. For the most part, the symptoms have been mild, but certainly very fatiguing. And just try to drink a lot of liquids and sleep it off.
Okay. Now that you have COVID, how do you think this administration has handled the pandemic? Does it give you a new insight?
Well, certainly, this administration, President Trump, has really been reckless from the very beginning, in denial and not being forthcoming with the public. We now know from the Woodward recordings of his conversations with the president that the president all along knew that this was a very significant, contagious, and deadly virus. And certainly, he's never put in place any comprehensive strategy. He's never put in place the Defense Production Act to produce more PPE for the entire country. Instead, he's really polarized this issue and polarized whether we should be wearing masks or social distancing, whether we should be sheltering in place when at all possible. And it's really unfortunate. So, as somebody who's contracted this is a serious thing. And to think that there's so many individuals that are have immune compromised challenges in their lives, they don't need to be challenged with this. The president just been reckless and not a great role model and not a uniter in terms of a cohesive strategy for our country.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on now. We want to get your position on oil exploration and drilling and fracking in your congressional district.
Well, fracking and oil drilling in my district have always been challenges. That's why I am proud that the first bill I ever introduced in the House of Representatives was the California Clean Coast Act, which would prohibit future offshore oil drilling off our coastline. And it's extremely important that we slowly transition and divest ourselves from fossil fuels and invest more in renewable energy sources. That's why I'm also very proud to have sponsored the Energy Opportunity Zones Act legislation just this week, which would incentivize businesses to invest and get tax credits for investments in renewable energy technology off our coast. And lastly, I'm proud that I also sponsored the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, which is a bill that would put into conservation of the public lands and U.S. Forest Service, Los Padres Forest, and the Carrizo Plain, over 250,000 acres into conservation, and stop future gas and oil drilling on those public lands.
Okay. And now we just want to talk about climate change. What's your position on climate change? It wasn't really a topic in the debate last night, and we haven't really heard much about it. It hasn't sort of been on the forefront. What's your position on climate change?
Well, climate change is one of the most serious challenges of our time for our world, our country, and certainly our communities. We are seeing the change in climate in a drastic way, in such a way that we are now even having year-round fire seasons in California. All us Californians and people on the Central Coast need to look no further than our own backyard to see what climate change is doing and what it means in terms of year-round fire seasons. Uh, Climate change is real, and I've sponsored, like I said, a number of pieces of legislation addressing many aspects of climate change, including the energy opportunity zones that gets us to invest more in renewable energy and addresses climate change. But a great part of climate change is resulting from human activity. And that's why we need to make sure that we are not emitting more emissions, that we are mitigating those emissions, and that we take the challenge seriously.
Now, we also want to get your position on the governor's recent move to bring the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles to zero in the next few decades in both cars and trucks. It seems like something that's not going to be easy to do.
Well, when you consider climate change and the havoc it's causing in our world, in our communities, and in our state, uh, we need to look at aggressive policies that are going to get us there. And I'm proud that this governor has set aggressive goals, not only for renewable energy investments and renewable energy goals, but also taking specific policies as it relates, for example, with our vehicles that are produced in the future, to make sure that we are moving towards vehicles that aren't dependent on fossil fuels. So absolutely, I support this governor's move. I do, though, believe that we do need to see a plan of transition of how we're going to get there. It's one thing to set out an ambitious goal, but it's another to also put down the blueprint and the steps and the strategy of how we're going to get there. So you need to have sub goals and lay out how we're going to achieve that goal by the timeline that he's outlined. But yes, I am supportive.
Okay. And this is a big issue, especially here in the area that you represent. How do we really solve the issue of being able to afford to live here? You know, we've always had the issue with housing. It's so difficult for people. What do you think are some steps? What do we need to do? How do we solve this problem?
Well, the Central Coast, like other coastal areas, have a pretty high land costs that really create higher inflated housing costs in our area. And what we need to do is, myself in Congress, we need to continue to provide the type of financial grants and funding for states and local governments so that we could partner at all levels of government to incentivize more workforce and affordable housing. The low-income housing tax credit, for example, that the federal government has provided, has been responsible for 80 to 90% of all affordable housing in the country. So we need to continue that tax credit, as well as CDBG funding, home funding, voucher programs for our veterans who are homeless, and for those that are extremely low income. And we need to just bring about partnerships between the private sector and the public sector, using all this funding that I just mentioned to bring about more workforce housing. I think it's important we do that so that people who grow up on the Central Coast can have a shot at owning their home in the future. That's what we need to do. And that, tied with good paying jobs, we need to make sure that there are also good paying jobs in our region, and make sure that we are doing everything possible to nurture and support the economic engines that drive our local economy.
California is considered a blue state. Now, how does being a Democrat affect how you will represent the district in Congress?
Well, irrespective of whether California is a blue state or not, I represent my constituents, be they Republicans or Democrats, whether they voted for me or not. I am committed to representing all the residents of the Central Coast. And certainly, the values of the Central Coast is what guides my decision making in Washington, and will continue to do so. That's who's elected me, and that is who I have the highest responsibility to, is the residents of the Central Coast who elected me.
And you have been critical of President Trump over the last 4 years. Do you support President Trump today, right now?
I think when you see this president, somebody who's divided our country, somebody who has lied again and again and time again, somebody who's divided us as a country, somebody whose policies have been erratic, whether it's trade, whether it's for our military, whether it's for our foreign policy with our allies. This president has really demonstrated that he's just not up for the challenge of being our president. And I think the best thing we could do is make sure that comes November, we have a new administration in the White House. So absolutely, I do not support this president's administration continuing. Now, when this president does something that I can agree with, I've supported it. The USMCA agreement was something that came together in a very bipartisan fashion, and I supported that. But the majority of times, this president has been out of step in terms of his actions, his policies, and his values with those of the Central Coast. And as such, I cannot continue to support this president in any way.
Okay. Does the deficit spending at the federal level concern you at all?
Absolutely. We should always be concerned about our deficit spending. I was concerned when my Republican colleagues and this president moved forward just last term in Congress, the GOP tax proposal, which gave the benefit to the top 1% wealthiest corporations and individuals in our country. But Elise, this is the issue. It added $2 trillion to our national debt, further exacerbating this lopsided fiscal challenge that we have in Washington. So absolutely, we should be concerned about the fiscal stability of our federal budget. We need to make sure that policies that we enact are fiscally responsible and benefit all Americans, not just the few or the wealthiest. And that's why that tax proposal was really, really bad for our country. Now, I also think we can work in a bipartisan way to reform the tax code so that we close all the loopholes that right now allow those wealthiest corporations to not have to pay any taxes. We just learned from the media that this president paid $0 in taxes for many years, and the last few years, he paid $750 in taxes. That's less than my 20-year-old son pays. That is audacious. And we need to make sure that people like this president and other people and corporations pay their fair share. So that's how we will get to right sizing and addressing our federal deficit.
This is a big topic right now. Your reaction right now, if the current Supreme Court Justice nominee is actually confirmed and seated on the court, and all this is happening right before the election?
Yes, well, the Senate set a terrible precedent in the transition of the last administration, where they clearly said on an election year, no president should nominate or seat a Supreme Court justice. They did that to President Obama. Well, I would say the precedent's been set. Why isn't it not good to follow that precedent and guidance this time around and let the American people decide who the next administration is going to be come November, and let that administration nominate and seat the next justice in the Supreme Court? So I believe it's important that we let the American people have a choice, as President Lincoln did during his years in office. He had a similar situation, but he took leadership and he said it's only right for the next administration to nominate and seat a justice. Even though he had the majority of the Senate, it was his party that had it. So I think we need to take guidance from some of our early founding fathers that put together a lot of the values and priorities in our Constitution that we now appreciate.
Okay. I think this is the last question. Would you support or oppose efforts to expand the court, which has been discussed?
Well, as you know, that is not something the House of Representatives has jurisdiction or authority over. That's a decision that the Senate will have to make. And when you consider the Senate decisions that are made, the filibuster issue, when you consider the fact that the Senate last time didn't confirm President Obama's nomination, now they want to confirm this one, it just tells you about the polarity of the Senate. And that is a decision that the Senate in the future may consider.
And speaking of the polarity, how can Democrats and Republicans start to get along and work together? It seems like there's such a divide.
Well, I think there's a lot of room for us to try to find common ground. The first thing we need to do is take a breath and take a civility pledge like I did when I came to the House of Representatives. I took a civility pledge that I wouldn't demagogue my colleagues, even though we might have strong disagreements. And I've demonstrated my commitment to bipartisanship by being part of a number of groups that work towards bipartisanship to find common ground. The Problem Solvers Caucus is one example. Half of the membership are Republican and half are Democrats. And just to show you the type of things that we've been able to do together, the Problem Solvers recently, in the last few weeks, and I believe a few days ago, put out a statement, put a proposal forward trying to bring together Democrats and Republicans with a COVID economic relief package in the middle of what Democrats wanted to do and Republicans wanted to do in terms of the dollar figures. So we continue to find opportunities to bring our parties together, be it on healthcare, be it on immigration, infrastructure, and now COVID economic relief. So I think it means a commitment to trying to find common ground and a commitment to not demagogue each other. Because when you demagogue each other, you lose mutual respect and mutual trust. And it doesn't lend itself to finding those few opportunities where we do agree on that we could move forward solutions for.
And last question, how do you feel about your chances to win your race? And what's one last message that you have for voters?
Well, I'm very proud of the support I've received from my constituents and the residents of the Central Coast last time around, and I expect and hope that they'll continue to do that again. I think I represent the values and priorities of the Central Coast. I've been working hard. I made sure that we are providing great constituent service, making sure that we are doing everything possible to move forward the priorities of the Central Coast, to crush this virus, to provide economic relief for those that are hurting, unemployed families, businesses, schools, local governments, and make sure that we are also doing everything possible to bring about good, well-paid jobs to our region, and to address the healthcare costs that we are all so concerned about, to reduce healthcare premiums and prescription drug costs, and also to address climate change. I would say that because I've been fighting for all those priorities that are in line with the Central Coast, I believe and am hopeful that they will again reelect me to represent them in Washington. Now, the last issue you said, if there's one last message I could say, I would say this election provides a very clear choice and contrast in us two candidates that are running for to represent the Central Coast. In my opponent, you have somebody who, like the president, has called COVID a hoax. He does not believe in women's right to reproductive choice or healthcare decisions for themselves. He is a climate change denier. He has been not what he says he is, a government watchdog, but rather a lobbyist for the oil companies in the area. So I think it becomes very clear to the residents of the Central Coast what's at stake, and a real contrast between choices of who to vote for to represent them in Washington.
Salud, thank you very much.
Thank you.